his opponent doesn't really have much of an army. That means he's not thinking about an all-in push. So with a method of deduction, he has to think that his opponent either has a hidden tech building somewhere, or is planning to stack up cash to rebuild his MCV. And with that in mind, he brilliantly moved in his 3 Tengus to harass the mineral light to disrupt the stacking of cash that much longer for him to erect up enough force or move his forces into the correct location to mount for an assault. And he's doing so quite successfully. I would say that the army count advantage is certainly at the side of the Empire player, and our Soviet player is just trying to scrambling up his forces here, because he is forced. He had to make a decision between continuing his plans to rebuild his MCV or start to produce units immediately, because he did move his terror drones inside of his opponent's base, and he spotted his opponent's strategy here, trying to stack up the units that he needs for harassment. And the Empire player is just being annoyed here, because his Tengus and his miners just taking turns to be frozen by the terror drone, and the mining activity of that particular refinery was completely brought to a halt, which is exactly the opposite as what the Empire player would be looking for. And one of the Tengus was left to guard the ore collector there, and doing so quite unsuccessfully. I would say the micromanagement of our Soviet player is certainly very, very good. This is looking to be a very peculiar and very long game indeed. It would have to come down to one decisive battle, since now either of the two players have the capacity of expanding elsewhere and changing to other tags, and it has to come to one massive engagement, and it's all going to come down to micro as to how well you manage your units to increase their combat efficiency and bring down your opponent's army in a bare minimal losses, so that you can make a counter push before your opponents can produce enough units to defend against it and basically trash you. So either of these players have the chance to do exactly of what I said, and 4 Tengus moving in for harassment as I spoke, and the position of the Tengus, a compound with a secret protocol of honorable discharge, is going to prove quite annoying for the Soviet player to deal with, since he doesn't really have any means of repairing his tanks. So, I guess he does have literally. I was eating my own word there, but that's something I often do as a commentator. My understanding of the game is really not that amazing. But one pesky terror drone is still inside of the water, ready for harassment any time of the day, and one of the Tengus had to be left there for defensive purposes, and now it's going to be moved away. This might prove to be unwise for the... Oh, I see. There was a trap. There was a trap to lure the terror drone in for the Tengus to do a bit of double back to destroy the terror drone. The terror drone has been pesky all day, and it's rank up to a lieutenant as well. So very, very good harassment coming from our Soviet player, and while he's applying pressure to his opponent's fire terror drones, he's just continually building up his tank army here. And keep in mind in a straight up battle, if you don't use the special, the secondary abilities, excuse me, lots of breath, I've adjusted up. Yes, back into casting mode. If you don't utilize the secondary ability of your units, in a straight up battle, the tsunami tanks will lose to the hammer tanks, because, well, their armors are thicker. And tsunami tanks, basically, their advantage is the mobility and the ability to repair themselves, while the hammer tank is more thicker armor and cheaper price, and they do have the ability of Leech Wind, which is very annoying. It has an increased range, much longer range than their cannons, and it can suck up your opponent's weapon for your own use. That means one tank will have the firepower of 2 tanks if it successfully suck out a tsunami tank here. And with micro, I think the hammer tanks will do fairly well here. Although, keep in mind that while you are moving back with your leash bin, you cannot fire, so the Empire player was taking a bit of free shots back there, but his army counts in sheer number was lower than that of his opponents, so he's going to be pushed back by the Soviet player here. The Soviet player just yet biding his time, just look to diminish his opponent's army just that much more for him to make a successful counter push that will practically end the game. I think that's what he has in mind right now, because he's not planning to produce his MCV anytime soon. And well, he does have a terror drone out. Perhaps he's recognizing that his opponent's only thing his opponent has to be against the annoying leisure bins is the ability to move and shoot off all tanks, really, but also compounded by the mobility of the tsunami tanks. The tsunami tanks are a bit faster than other tanks, I would say. Well, perhaps they're on the same footing as the Guardian tanks, but I would say the tsunami tanks are a bit faster than the hammer tanks, so if you use the terror drone to freeze the tsunami tanks, they cannot run away, and they have to be lynched by the leisure bin of the hammer tanks there. And once the hammer tanks have all the weapons of the tsunami tanks, they will have double the firepower practically. And we see one of the general hammer tanks actually have mounted 2 guns. One of them is from the tsunami tanks, which is the final insult for a tank, having your weapon taken away for your opponent to use. But enough of that. We see a air transition from our Empire player here. He has transitioned into 3 VXs, is now going to move in for some good harassments, or indeed the destruction of these forces, just to wear down his opponent's army enough for him to move in. But the positioning of the Soviet player is phenomenal. He has almost predictably, oh my god, how did he even recognize the fly path of those 3 tankers? No, excuse me, 3 VXs. He didn't even see them. Oh my god, he just moved his full proof up to the center of the map here and just randomly moved them to the left, and just happens to catch the VXs in flight, trying to move into to harass the Soviet player. But there'll be too much accidents, I don't know, but that was too good to be done by chance. So the Soviet player just have a incredible game sense here, just moving his Boomfox to intercept his opponent's VXs here, and the VXs are trying to move in once again for harassments, but they are going to be pulled back soon enough, because the Empire player does see the Bullfrog at the front of his base, which will signal a very large push coming from the Soviet player. Now the Soviet player is just making his push, biding his time and positioning his army here, and trying to set up a system that will sufficiently crush his opponents. Keep in mind, with the same number, the Soviet player's army is more cost efficient. They do have more firepower and more fidelities coming in, and they are in greater number. I would say the tank count of the Soviet player is larger than that of the Empire player, just because how cheap those tsunami tanks are. The Empire player, an Empire faction representing a real-world Japanese culture, their quality and versatility is certainly commendable, but their cost is also quite high. So representing that, the cost of the Imperial Forces units are also quite considerable. So I would say overall the Soviet player has regained his upper hand of this particular match here, but this is still a very, very close game. Neither player wants to engage. They just don't want to commit here, so they're just testing the water, push back to either of their opponent's main base. Although the Soviet player has reproduced his MCV, so the expanding capacity of the Soviet forces has come back, and now it's going to move his MCV towards this direction, which I assume the destination of the MCV will be this location here. The 4-crop expansion for the Soviet player, and it's now going to expand there and extend his economic advantage over his opponents, so he can have a overwhelming capacity of reinforcement and so forth to crush his opponent's force entirely. The the Empire player actually has a timing window here to move in, since the Soviet player has spent quite a lot of money to produce his MCV. He will not have enough to reinforce his army fast enough for him to replenish while the Empire player does have that. And if the Empire player moves in now, he might have a chance of winning this game, but if he doesn't move in soon, the Soviet player would have a third refinery up, and the Empire player is not planning to rebuild his MCV anytime soon. From the build time of the units inside there, I would not think it's an MCV, and yes, indeed, it is a tsunami tank. So, without building his MCV and without the capacity of re-expanding, the Empire player is going to fall behind very severely eventually, with a smaller economy. So you just have to see how efficient that he used his army. So the Soviet player here just leaving his army inside of his main base here, just to, you know, be cautious about his opponent's attack and harassment and so forth, while he's expanding safely at 4 o'clock of the map. This hidden expansion here is very, very secret. The Empire player doesn't know about that at all, and even using freezing device of the terror drone here, freezing one of the miners and tag it for bounty hunters, which means you can retrieve the army, the money, excuse me, for yourself, and using the secret protocol, dropping debris from space, and so forth, to the miners here, and bringing the mining activity of this refinery completely to a halt for the Soviet player to gain an advantage over his opponents. And now he does have a third refinery. He would have a larger capacity of reinforcing his units here, and the Empire player, recognizing that losing one of his miners for a considerable period of time, now the balance of the game has been tipped and he has to make a push. So he's looking to position himself outside of the Soviet player space and going to make a big push here, and a tank line, a massive army of tsunami tanks are now going to push into a massive army of hammer tanks, and the hammer tanks are leashing away at the tanks. However, a trouble VX dealing DPS in the sky, and the tsunami tanks, 2 of them as decoys to absorb the freezing beam of the terror drones and dealing a massive DPS while they're frozen, since they're very close to their opponents. Indeed, to their opponents, and the rest of the tanks just keeping their mobility and trying to push to now seeing the MCV. The Empire player has to realize, he possibly has a third refinery. He has to end the game right here, right now. He has to kill off his opponent's tank army with bare minimum losses, with a larger efficiency, or indeed use the honorable discharge to maximize the value of his army here before he gets killed off. And now the Empire player does only have 2 mining refineries, while the Soviet player has 3, and the Soviet MCV is still intact, although in the yellow. It's now going to deploy inside of a main base, and the Empire player, recognizing this, is going to GG out of this game. Our Soviet player, RZZI, I would assume that's his name, if I remember correctly, wins for the motherland. And I'll see you next time.